Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Are we on the air?
We're on the air.
Good. No, I'm actually asking David for real if we're on the air. I didn't, with all the calls I got this week and texts saying, oh, I had oral surgery or something, somebody unfortunately passed away. I didn't think there'd be anybody here tonight because I must have gotten 10 of these calls from different individuals and couples. So it's very, very nice to be joined by friends. Some of you are new, welcome. And some of you who are very old, I don't mean in the the chronological years upon this earth business, please find someone whom you don't recognize and do the thing that we are supposed to have such a great reputation for, because there are several folks like that here tonight. Just a few reminders, we are going next week into well, the holiday season. Our holiday specifically being Hanukkah, which we celebrate every year. Go ahead. With the Super Supper party and fundraiser, which will be held next week. It starts at 6 o'clock. All the information is online. Actually, it's in front of me too. $10 a person, $25 a family. Those are recommended because it funds our NOAA homeless, houseless feeding program. So this is how we get the money to put that together. So that's in place of services next week. The following week, on the 15th of December, will be our final service for 2024. And we will hear from State Representative Samantha Steckhoff, who's going to talk to us and give us a little bit of a Lansing update. And then we will be on hiatus until the 5th of January. But there's still plenty of things going on. Consult the calendar. Yoga will be held throughout that. I think history class with Natan may take a little break, but there'll also be the daytimers having a big Hanukkah party. And really, Suzanne needs your RSVPs for that if you're interested. And we've also, of course, got Mahjong and other things too. So take a look at the newsletter. If you don't get it, you should, and let us know. But even if you don't get it, you can find it on our website, chj-detroit.org. It's right there. Just click on it. We upload it every week or two. Our readers tonight are Natan Fuchs and Beth DeZoden Fuchs, Suzanne Paul, Saul Foreman, Lonnie Fleischer, Charles Paul, and Deborah Shanker. And Arthur, if you will, we'll begin with our first slide here. Where the world is dark with illness, let us spark the light of healing. Where the world is bleak with suffering, let us kindle the light of caring. Where the world is dimmed by lies, let us ignite the light of truth. May the honor of lighting these flames inspire us to acts of goodness that illumine all the world. May the mitzvah of lighting Shabbat candles remind us to sanctify life with the power of our light. And I'd like to invite Natan and Beth to light our candles tonight. Baruch haor ba'olam, Baruch haor ba'adam, Baruch haor ba'shalom, ba'shalom, Baruch haor, Baruch haor, v'Shabbat.
Shabbat Shalom. May the doors of our community be wide enough to receive all who hunger for love, all who are lonely for friendship. May our congregation welcome all who have cares to unburden, gratitude to experience, or hopes to nurture. May the doors of our community be narrow enough to shut out pettiness and pride, envy and enmity. May their threshold be no stumble block to young or unsure feet. May they be too high to admit complacency, selfishness, and harshness. May this congregation be, for all who enter, the doorway to a richer, more meaningful life.
Teka Israel, ma tovu, o alecha Yaakov, o alecha Yaakov, mishkinoteka Israel. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, lechu Teka Israel, ma tovu, o alecha Yaakov, o alecha Yaakov, mishkenoteka Israel.
Tonight, as we welcome Shabbat, we look to this moment in time to once again gain perspective on where we have been and where we are going.
On this Shabbat,
may we find the space to consider and to challenge. May we find the courage to do what is right. Together, let us find meaning, calm our anxieties, understand our purpose, and appreciate our accomplishments.
Let us find the strength to continue working for ourselves and others.
Let us share the burdens and blessings of responsibility. Let us locate the will to change the things we can no longer accept. Let us, everyone?
black. We didn't give you the color copy. You read
Sorry. Let us do all of this and more, mindful that we are a community of humanistic believers, unbroken and unbowed, prepared to face all that life has in store for us.
Let us strive to feel these bonds of belief and community when we are together and when we are apart.
Okay. Let us rejoice in our tithes. Let us rejoice in our collective power.
Let us rejoice in the gift of Shabbat. Shalom Aleichem, Ohavei HaShalom, Shomerei Shalom. Shalom Aleichem, Rodafei HaShalom, Shalom Aleichem. Boachem Shalom Aleichem, Rodefei HaShalom. Shalom Aleichem.
Let us endeavor to find still moments, quiet spaces within to refresh ourselves, moments without ceaseless questions or inner debates, when we meditate only on goodness. Let us endeavor to nurture courage, recalling moments of strength. Let us remember days of fortitude and the power that we found. Let us endeavor to turn to light, to feel the warmth of a loving touch, our faces and fingers outstretched, alive to each other.
Lechuna ranana, lechuna ranana, lechuna ranana la Shabbat. Lechuna ranana, lechuna ranana, lechuna ranana la Shabbat. Naria, naria, layom simchatenu, nikadma b'shalom. Naria, naria, layom simchatenu, mizmirot naria lo. Lechuna ranana, lechuna ranana, lechuna ranana la Shabbat. Lechuna ranana, lechuna ranana, lechuna ranana la Shabbat. Naria, naria, layom simchatenu, nichadma b'shalom. Naria, Maria, layom simchatenu, bizmirot namria lo. Lechuna ranana, lechuna ranana, lechuna ranana la Shabbat. Lechuna ranana, lechuna ranana, lechuna ranana la Shalom.
Neil deGrasse Tyson wrote, "We are all connected to each other biologically, to the earth chemically, to the rest of the universe atomically. There are as many atoms in a single molecule of DNA as there are stars in the typical galaxy. We are, each of us, a little universe." Carl Sagan put it this way, "The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself."
Eifo ori, ori bi, eifo tikvati, tikvati bi, eifo kochi, kochi bi, vegam bat, vegam bat, eifo kochi, kochi bi, vegam bat, vegam bat. Where is my light? My light is in me. Where is my hope? My hope is in me. Where is my strength? My strength is in me. And in you, and in you. Where is my strength? My strength is in me. And in you, and in you.
I love looking at the crowd every time I read. The transforming power of love, the redeeming power of compassion, the healing power of forgiveness. These endure in every age. The joy which comes from sharing, the strength which comes from striving, the nourishment which comes from nature. These endure in every age. The sanctity of life, the value of truth, the primacy of justice, these endure in every age. Amidst never-ending change, may we have the wisdom to know and to cherish those teachings which endure for all time.
Niftach lanu sharet tzedek chen v'chesed v'rachamim. Niftach lanu sharet tzedek chen v'chesed v'rachamim. Sharim la shalom, niftach lanu b'navovam. Sharim la shalom, niftach lanu b'navovam. Niftach lanu sharet tzedek chen v'chesed v'rachamim. Niftach lanu sharet tzedek chen v'chesed v'rachamim.
When justice burns within us like a flaming fire, when love evokes willing sacrifice from us, when, to the last full measure of selfless devotion, we demonstrate our belief in the ultimate triumph of truth and righteousness, then goodness encompasses our lives and we can begin to change the world.
Amar Rabbi Akiva, Amar Rabbi Akiva, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, ze klal gadol gadol b'Torah, Amar Rabbi Akiva, Amar Rabbi Akiva, Amar Rabbi Akiva, ve'ahavta l'reacha mocha, ze klal gadol gadol b'Torah, Amar Rabbi Akiva.
Tonight, let us proclaim our fervent desire that those with the power to act do so with wisdom and discernment, that those who face danger find courage and hope, that we who long for peace will someday build for ourselves a world without war where all will embrace each other in love and acceptance. May we at last fulfill the vision of this Israeli prophet, beating our swords into plowshares, our spears into pruning hooks. As together we declare, not by might nor by power, but by the spirit of our shared humanity, shall we finally live in peace.
Na'aseh shalom, shalom ba'olam. Na'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam ve'imru shalom. Na'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Shalom, Na'aseh shalom, shalom ba'olam, Na'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol ha'olam, ve'imru shalom.
In this community where we find strength and common purpose, we turn our minds and hearts toward all those who need our love and support, those who are ill, those who suffer pain of the body or spirit, those who are lonely, those who have been wronged. Tonight, we extend our well wishes to these members of our community and to their loved ones, to Nitzan Ben-Gal, Rabbi Peter Schweitzer, Jim Walker, and Kate Ben-Ami. If there's someone whom you're thinking about tonight to whom you would like us to extend well wishes, we'll go around the room. Anybody on this side? Anybody here? Yes. Yeah. Not Tom. Anybody on this side of the room? Did we miss anyone at all? May all who suffer know that they are not alone, that we are there. May they be healed quickly. May they experience a complete recovery, a refuah shlema, the renewal of their bodies and the renewal of their spirits. At darker times in Jewish history, there came a moment such as this in Jewish services when prayers were offered for those held hostage. And while we are very, very grateful for the fact that so many have been restored to their loved ones, we are sad to have learned about the deaths of many of them. And we again tonight find ourselves still in this reality, this bitter reality where so many are held hostage. So we now, in the spirit of our ancestors who lived through those terrible days, offer these fervent hopes. May those taken captive find the courage to carry on. May those who love them not despair of their return. May they soon emerge from their confinement, those who are left, whole in body and in spirit, to know once again the embrace of their loved ones.
Makom ha'koach betocheinu, mekorot ha'bracha miroteinu. May the source of strength that dwells so deep within us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Shalom. Mekom ha'koach betocheinu, mekorot ha'bracha michevroteinu. May those in need of healing know refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Shalom.
Our thoughts turn to those who are no longer with us, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, Oh, sorry, I missed a, I'm sorry. Get to that in a minute. We are but sojourners in existence, great and small. Celestial bodies and humans are born, live, and die. The universal decree that every journey in existence must end cannot be stayed. May our earthly sojourn bring us the wisdom to accept this common destiny with tranquility and peace. Thus will we find in the recesses of our being strength and consolation when the pilgrimage of a dear one is ended and a link is broken in the chain of love and friendship that binds us together. Every being walks in the valley of the shadow of death. Yet even on days of darkness, we can find the path that leads us back to life. Now we continue. As our thoughts are turning to those no longer with us, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every people and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. We recall now our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have taken into our hearts with our own. Tonight, we observe the yard sites of these beloved members of our community and their loved ones. Shirley Belkin, Marilyn Orphis Bricker, Matilda Citron, Sadie Cohen, Sylvian Deravan, Betty Events, Irving Feldman, Marshall Ferguson, Samuel Finkelstein, Joel Foreman, Dorothy Frank, Israel Cantor Fuchs, Diana Ginsburg, Samuel Ginsburg, Celia Goldsmith, Ida Guss, Florine Halpern, Marguerite Harris, Madeline Jacobs, Cindy Klein, Molly Litke, Priscilla Molnar, Gertrude Pinkney, John Sloan, Joseph Vidra, David Walker, Lyle Whitney, and Betty Wilsey. If there's someone whom you're thinking about, whom you'd like remembered this evening.
Joseph Ernst.
Thank you. Anybody on this side? Anybody over here that we want? Thank you. Anybody in the back? I saw a hand. Anybody else? Oh, I'm sorry, Joseph.
Paul Palazzolo II.
Thank you. Did we miss anyone? We say, Yehi Zikram Livracha. May their memories provide us with blessing, by which we express our hopes that as we go through those dark moments in life when we miss them the most, that some memory will come to relieve our suffering, if even just for a moment. If you can do so comfortably, I invite you to rise as together we recite our humanistic version of Kaddish. Nit gadal v'nit kadash beruach ha'adam. Let us dignify and ennoble all people in the spirit of our shared humanity. Let us acclaim the preciousness of life. Let us show gratitude for life by approaching it with reverence. Let us embrace the whole world, even as we wrestle with its parts. Let us each, in our own way, take up our share in serving the world and seeking truth. May our commitment to life help us to strengthen healing of spirit and peace of mind. May justice and peace permeate and comfort the house of Israel and all those who dwell on earth. And let us say, Ken Yehi, may it be so. Please be seated. So the talk that I'm going to share with you tonight, this little story, was originally written to be shared on our 60th anniversary. How many of you were there? We had just a magnificent occasion. The whole room was filled. And I know many of them are watching us on YouTube tonight, and I'm glad that those of you who were able to join us did. So this was really in the context of just providing a little bit of insight into the movement, the history of our movement for humanistic Judaism. And I venture to guess that some of you know the story and some of you don't, but it is not in our most prominent history books. It's not a story we generally tell, but it happens to be a story that, well, even though I wasn't here for humanistic Judaism and its growth, I had the, I guess the good fortune, if you will, of witnessing from another perspective, because I was there in the Reform movement when much of this took place. So what I'm going to share with you tonight is the story of how humanistic Judaism finally got its independence. So in case you didn't already know this, and I suspect that probably most of you who have any association with our congregation of any number of years, humanistic Judaism and this place itself were both products of Reform Judaism. Most versions of Judaism start out with another form of Judaism that they're breaking away from or rebelling from or building on or what have you. Now that night we talked about the history of our service, and we know that this was originally called the Birmingham Temple. That word temple, that's a little bit of a giveaway. Mostly it was American Reform and some German Reform congregations that took on the word temple. It wasn't very common among Jews outside of those areas. And we learned how it was originally a gathering of people who thought they were going to put together a new suburban temple in Birmingham. We've already hashed over why they never came up with a better name, but it was always meant to be temporary, and we just fixed that little glitch a couple of years ago. The earliest Reform rabbis, of course, did not study at a Reform Jewish rabbinical school. And so, just like that, the earliest humanistic rabbis, neither did they study at a humanistic rabbinical school, because neither of those institutions existed when the people who founded the respective movements set out on their paths. Rabbi Wein, Rabbi Daniel Friedman of Chicago's Beth Or, Rabbi Peter Schweitzer of our New York congregation, Rabbi Robert Barr of Congregation Beth Adam in Cincinnati, yours truly. We were all ordained at the Reform Movement's Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, the very same place, and I think on the very same campus. Each of them, those who came before me, of course, honed their humanistic Jewish sensibilities while at that school, while studying at what we'll call HUC, as it's commonly known. They did so in the company of other like-minded people who were also exploring non-theistic approaches to being Jewish. Within the framework, under the very organizational umbrella of Reform Judaism, these scholars, these students, even many of the alumni who were out in the field, well, they were creating their own versions of the Sherwin-Wine experiment. And for a few decades, it seemed that they might come very close to overshadowing and perhaps completely eliminating the need for the independent movement for humanistic Judaism that was taking shape under Rabbi Wein's and this temple's leadership during those exact same years. The early successes of these humanistically and non-theistically inclined Reform rabbis posed an enormous challenge to our own congregation and our movement that, and this is the part that I think many of you don't know, was happening for a number of decades. But Rabbi Wein knew about it, and I knew about it. He knew about it from his seat right here at the Birmingham Temple, and I encountered it in the classrooms of the Hebrew Union College at the very moment in the history of the Reform movement when humanistic Judaism suddenly became, in the Reform movement, a very hot topic. The debate about whether and how the Reform movement could accommodate non-theistic, meaning people who don't pray to God, non-theistic member congregations, actually began in the late 1960s. I was not there for that. It finally ended at the very beginning of the 1990s. For those of us who have encountered Reform Judaism over the last 3+ decades, this may be difficult to believe. We've seen them become very, very traditional in most ways. But if you were exposed to the Reform Judaism of the early and mid-20th century, it might not be terribly difficult for you to imagine that a sizable minority was already exploring a God-free Reform alternative. Rabbi Weins wrote and spoke about how it was this freedom within Reform Judaism that attracted him, he was raised a conservative Jew, to study at HUC in the first place. The context in which the humanistically and non-theistically inclined Reform scholars and rabbis began to assert their vision was a Reform Judaism that from the 1960s to the 1980s was experiencing as a whole, as an entire movement, an identity crisis about whether and what should be the ritual and theological boundaries of the movement, and about whether a movement founded on the idea of radical, autonomous decision-making when it comes to Jewish practice or belief should really have any boundaries at all. The mid-19th century founders, 100 years earlier, of Reform Judaism had always promoted a more naturalistic approach to Judaism, an approach that placed an emphasis on rationalism, on reason. These were their banners. But by 100 years later, in the mid-20th century, there was a new reform, largely led by younger students and rabbis, that advocated a return to more religious ritual and observance, and that, of course, included belief, or at least saying that you believed in God. Their rise undoubtedly contributed to Rabbi Wein's own frustrations with Reform Judaism, and helped to lead, I believe, to his departure from the movement very early on in the 1960s. But even as he became busy building this radically non-theistic alternative to Reform, and really to every other religious form of Judaism, the humanistically inclined friends and colleagues that he left behind there, particularly a small but very vocal group of faculty, of students, of rabbis in the field, became determined to fight for the right to call themselves Reform Jews. They did not want to leave the Reform movement. They wanted to be part of a Reform movement that gave them the right and autonomy to believe and behave the way they chose. And though their backs were against the wall in the face of this growing traditionalism that has now, in so many ways, at least ritually speaking, flooded Reform Judaism, they did have out in the wider Reform world allies, even allies who didn't see necessarily things their way, but who supported this right, who opposed the idea of boundaries in Reform Judaism. Anti-intellectual, anti-freedom, anti-autonomy, they called them. Though he had removed himself from their debate, Rabbi Wein was aware of it. He knew them all. And he watched closely as these two factions, the rationalists, the ones who wanted no boundaries, whether they themselves were non-theists or not, that was immaterial in the fight, and the ritualists who said, no, there are boundaries, there are walls. If you do this, you're not a Reform Jew. Now, Rabbi Wein was not unconcerned about the challenges that a victory for his friends, these humanistically and non-theistically inclined Reform Jews back in his school and in the Reform movement, would have for our very movement. It is no exaggeration to say that had Reform Judaism decided to welcome that branch of its members under the Reform congregational umbrella, our movement very likely, I believe, would have ceased to exist. And so it was that Rabbi Wein set out to very clearly delineate the differences between the Reform, humanistic, and non-theistic contingent, and the principles of humanistic Judaism, represented by his greatest achievement, this temple. In order to do this, he challenged the leader of the Reform Jewish non-theists, a brilliant rabbi, a professor of philosophy, my teacher, Alvin Reines. Dr. Reines was among the most influential teachers in my life. And he was every bit the non-theist and non-supernaturalist that Rabbi Wein was. He and his followers fervently believed that the only place, though, for non-theistic Jews was inside the Reform movement. And with the complicated jargon that only a brilliant philosopher could produce, he set out, through books and journal articles and many a lecture, to prove that Reform Judaism itself could only exist, that the movement itself was illegitimate if it did not accommodate people like us. He wrote a book about it. It was called Polydoxy. In the book Polydoxy, which I had to read 3 times to understand, but this is what I got from it. He proposed that if orthodoxy defines Jews who embrace the one truth, that's generally what orthodoxy means, there's one correct path, then polydoxy, well, that's what we will call Reform Jews who must, by the nature of their autonomous beliefs, embrace multiple truths. In the book, he suggested that to be true to its own origins and commitments, Reform Judaism must make a place for non-theists. That is, traditionalists need not give up their beliefs. They would certainly be the majority, and he knew that. But that if they wanted to offer something different than what conservative Judaism was offering, then they must adhere to this radical autonomy of choice that inspired the very first founders of Reform Judaism to create that movement in the first place. And just to depart from my text for a moment, many of you who have been recently to a Reform and then maybe a day later conservative synagogue know that the differences have been largely erased in many, many ways. A little bit of difference in how the tradition is done at the edges, but essentially now the same movement. In a blistering critique of Dr. Reinus's ideas, Rabbi Wein answered him this way. He said that polydoxy was meaningless, that people with multiple truths could not constitute a community or movement of people who shared any important commitments other than wanting to be together. Rabbi Wein argued that what Rabbi Reinus was really doing was trying to keep humanistic Judaism inside the Reform movement. That's what he was doing. Knowing that Dr. Reinus's success could damage our movement, this is what Rabbi Wein wrote. What I say to polydoxy's Jews is what I have said to so many Unitarians. Since most of you are humanists anyway, why torture yourself? Be bold. Announce your humanism. He continued, to turn Reform Judaism into an institution which seeks to accommodate all opinions provides none. Rabbi Reinus, who had a temper that I can personally attest to, decried Rabbi Wein and his humanists, calling them, the orthodoxy of the left. What better way to insult, right? Rabbi Wein, though, was fine with that. He did not found a congregation or a movement to accommodate multiple truths. However, other than to critique Rabbi Reinus and his humanists of the Reform persuasion, as I like to call them, Rabbi Wein really had nothing else he could do. He wasn't a member of this movement. He had no influence. He could only watch the Reform humanists from the sideline and focus his own energies on building our movement. Despite the rise of the traditionalist Reform Jews, who, of course, you know by now have taken over, Reinus and his followers actually did enjoy some early victories. Eager to accommodate all of the factions of its then very splintered movement, the Reform movement published a new prayer book in the 1970s. You may be familiar with it, The Gates of Prayer. Anybody remember that? There was an edition that went from right to left. There was one that went from left to right. Very, very indicative of the variety of voices they were trying to capture in this book. The book was a mess. what it sought to do, which is to bind people who were so disparate in their beliefs and practices together, it wound up only illuminating the many differences. Another professor of mine, who was quite the traditionalist among Reform Jews, Dr. Petrowski, said in a review that he wrote for the Conservative Jewish Journal, talk about a in the eye, he called the article "Bookbinder to the Rescue," and implied that the only way that Reformed Jews at that moment in the 1970s could ever find unity is through a bookbinder. Here's what a mess it was. It tried to satisfy Dr. Reinus's polydox demands for multiple truths by providing multiple services with different attitudes and different approaches to Jewish tradition and to God. Some of them were right out of the old Union Prayer Book, if you remember that document of Reform Judaism, that had served that movement well for over 100 years with very few changes. Some of them looked exactly like, with very tiny changes, particularly their Friday night service, their most important service, one of the, I think, 17 that were in the book, looked exactly like the conservative and very similar to the Orthodox service that is being used at conservative and Orthodox services, and today, of course, Reform services, just a word or two away from being Orthodox. And then there was that other service, the polydox service, the one that looked suspiciously, extraordinarily close to our service. And in fact, there was not one single mention of God in the English. Now, the Hebrew had some, but you got to sing the songs, right? The reading we did for the memorial, the one I almost missed, came out of that group. And I have used many of their readings in the past. They were identical to us in their beliefs about the world, just not about Humanistic Judaism as a movement. By presenting these traditional and non-theistic services side by side in the same book, what they wound up doing actually was showing which faction was winning. You could literally look at the books after 5 or 6 years and see where the edge was darkened and where no one had cracked the spine. And the edge was darkened at the religious services, the very traditional services. It was becoming pretty clear that humanists had no home in Reform Judaism. This failure foreshadowed just how right Rabbi Wein had been to insist upon building an independent movement. He could have gone back. He could have joined Rabbi Reinus. But he never wavered from that path. He never joined the polydox who sought to be humanistic Jews under Reformed Jewish cover. It never occurred to him to take this congregation to the Reform movement and ask it to be accepted. He understood that our approach to Jewish life would be swamped there, overwhelmed, ultimately strangled. And yet, there were some in our small movement who still held out hope for accommodation to Reform Judaism. And the most prominent of them was Rabbi Robert Barr. He was a student of Sherwin-Wine, and he was and is the founder of Cincinnati's humanistic congregation, Beth Adam. Beth Adam was an early member of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. Beth Adam, the House of Humanity, was one of the names. Perhaps I think it garnered maybe the second highest number of votes in our search for a new name here. But more on that in a moment. Aside from his critique of the polydoxer Reform Jews, there had been very little that Rabbi Wein, as I said, could have done to stop them. So even as he remained acutely aware of these ongoing battles, he knew that his task was to do the work here. Perhaps the greatest of his declarations of independence from Reform Judaism was to create our own seminary, the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism. And he went on to create other institutions as well, the Association of Humanistic Rabbis, Actually, Lonnie's on the faculty, we should mention. Yes, and I have taught for the Institute as well. And he helped to put together the Tamura School and movement for secular humanistic Judaism in Israel, which is thriving. But let's go back now to Cincinnati. Not coincidentally, by the way, also the home of the Hebrew Union College. Despite Rabbi Wine's and the Birmingham Temple's great accomplishments and all these wonderful new institutions that were bringing forth an independent humanistic Jewish movement, Beth Adam, and I think part of this was geography, simply could not stop flirting with the Reform movement. I won't go into all the reasons. Honestly, I've read some of their manifestos from those times, and I don't understand all of their reasons. I don't, to this day, understand why they have not joined us, why they feel that Reform Judaism was the proper home for them. Certainly, as I've mentioned, Cincinnati was part of the problem. Now, you may have heard recently, actually, Cincinnati, some news out of there. If you're not aware of this, the Cincinnati campus no longer houses a rabbinical school, the very first campus. There are 3 other campuses, one in Jerusalem, one in New York, and one in Los Angeles. But as of last year, there is no longer a functioning rabbinical school where I and Rabbi Friedman and Rabbi Barr and so many others were ordained. Just a little aside there, show you that they have their own challenges. And so it happened that Rabbi Barr's and his congregation's crusade takes us now to the 1980s, when Beth Adam made the fateful decision of submitting an application for affiliation with what was then known as the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, and today is called the Union for Reform Judaism. And that is how I found myself with a courtyard seat to the battle. I mentioned earlier that it was no exaggeration to believe that if Reform Judaism had actually taken Beth Adam under their wing, we may not be here today. We probably would not have been. There would certainly have been a Reform temple in this community that would have absorbed Reform Jews, humanistic Jews. But certainly, if not in this community, in other communities, and there are plenty of them where it may have succeeded. Our community, our movement was barely 20 years old at the time. We just celebrated 60, 3 times older than at the time this took place. Rabbi Wine and our independent movement were powerless, of course, as the Reform movement began to debate the question, can Cincinnati's Beth Adam become a member congregation in Reform Judaism? My own professor of Midrash, a rabbi named Eugene Mahali, a believer, not a non-theist, fought tooth and nail to get Beth Adam in, believing that these boundaries that Reform Judaism was setting were unhealthy for the movement. Eugene Mahali was a friend of Rabbi Wine. He officiated at Rabbi Wine's installation here. None of you were here then. This was back in 1963, 64. In our classes with him, I was still his student, he led us in a debate. And he said something like this, that he also included in a letter in support of Beth Adam. I remember this. I remember he had a Hungarian accent. Exclusion, ostracism, mindless stringency to appease the new traditionalists. These are alien to Reform Judaism. They will be the death knell of liberal religion. He promised Beth Adam. He knew for a fact they would be accepted. But the application, as it turned out, was the very opportunity that Reform's traditionalists had been waiting for to rid themselves of those non-theists once and for all time. In Toronto, the leading light of Reform Judaism, Rabbi Gunter Plaut, the author and editor of the Torah book they use on Saturday mornings to this day in Reform Judaism, he railed against Beth Adam's inclusion. It's elision of God, if you know him, you know he speaks like this, means that it did not admit of covenant or commandments. There are limits. the president of the Reform movement, the esteemed Alexander Schindler, one of the great creative minds of the 20th century Judaism, said, "I believe that the concept of God is the very foundation of Judaism. The quest for God defines us as a people. Giving voice to a personal God at the very heart of Reform Judaism is the core of being a Jew," in a joint statement issued by all 4 Reform temples in Cincinnati. And on it went. For the first time in its history, Reform Judaism had defined who and what they are and what their limits would be. God, Torah, Israel. Ask any traditional or conventional rabbi outside of our movement, what are the 3 pillars of Judaism? And they will tell you these 3 things. God, the deity, of course, Torah, the holy revelation, and Israel, not just the state, but the people, all of the people. Not that we don't hang on to that one very strongly too. We feel very much aligned. And we love Torah, but it's not our guide for morality. And God, well, he's a great character in a very important book. But for the first time now in their 150-year existence, Reform Judaism was also affirming this in a way that they had never done before, no less than conservative and orthodoxy and the others had done before them. And so, one by one, the movement's institutions weighed in. The rabbis instantly and overwhelmingly voted against them, very little debate. And finally, it made its way to the Board of Trustees of the Union, and by a vote of 115 to 13, Beth Adam's application was rejected. For the first and last time, it was made clear Reform Judaism was no polydoxy. Their application for membership actually had forced Reform Judaism to define its theological boundaries, and we were beyond them. But oh, the rejoicing in the world of Humanistic Judaism, even if you didn't know about it. His insistence, Rabbi Wein's, on a separate movement had been vindicated. This would be the only home for humanistic Jews. And when he was asked for a comment by the New York Times, this was a front-page story, Rabbi Wein said this: "Those who maintain that humanistic Judaism is incompatible with reform are correct. They are distinct and separate movements. Ours is a non-theistic movement. Theirs is a theistic one. And that was that." It was indeed a moment of extreme Jewish historical irony. Our own congregation, our Birmingham temple, had played a role in defining Reform Judaism, something that they had never been able to do with such clarity in the past. But of course, it was a great victory for our movement, too. I often say, do not judge our influence by the smallness of our movement. The Reform movement, for decades upon decades upon decades, was a tiny little movement, mostly meeting in salons and little temples that they put together in Germany and ultimately the United States. Every movement in humanity that was worth its salt started small. And they didn't grow in 10 years or 20 years or even 60 or 75 or 100. It takes longer than that. I shared this story, or intended to share this story on the 60th anniversary, because I wanted our leaders, and so many were arrayed, and I know some of them were watching tonight, and many of them are among our congregation this evening, to understand the impact that we have had. We forced the mighty Reform Judaism, now the largest Jewish religious movement in the world, to finally state what they believed. If it had ever been unclear, our confrontation with them, that we had nothing to do with other than to present an idea, made it very clear. So I had a whole conclusion, of course, that was written for the inspiration of the many presidents that were with us that evening. But I think it's appropriate for us to understand that these institutions that we're building, and we are still building them. And some of them have come and gone. But these institutions that we're building, they are important. We have learned over the last few months that there are many who seek the harm of the Jewish people. And that anti-Semitism, well, just when we thought it was gone, in America at least, it's back. A strong Jewish community is not united by its beliefs about God or how it worships or doesn't worship. A strong Jewish community is united by our feelings of kinship, our feelings of family. We are older than conventional understandings of race or of ethnicity. We are a very, very old people, as Sherwin Wine said very frequently. And to have places where we can take our own traditions and make them work for us, that's important. Because a family does not include only those who agree with them or see the world in the same way. If any of you were home for Thanksgiving, I'm sure you didn't need a reminder, but you might have gotten one there. A family is a family, but a place of study, a place of consideration, a place of reflection, a community like that, well, you can have that and be family. You can have that within your family and over-compassing and threaded all through our ancient nation of Israel, our ancient Jewish people. What we've been doing here for the last 60 years is making sure that the Jewish family has this option. We don't seek to say what Judaism is. We seek to be part of what the various Judaisms are, and so that the Jewish people will always have access to it. We continue to work. Doesn't matter that we're small. It is one of the most significant and radical and wonderful ideas ever launched by our very, very old people. So as we all say in our tradition, may we go michayil l'chayil, from strength to strength. So happy anniversary, everybody. All righty. So we're going to conclude now with this beautiful song written by Debbie Friedman. You know, a lot of our music comes from Debbie Friedman, and recently, Debbie Friedman of blessed memory, I knew her, actually knew her over many, many years, from the time I was in college all the way through when I worked at the JCC. I hosted her for so many concerts. What a fabulous person she was. She wrote so many of these tunes, and I told her at one point that we were adapting them a little bit. She was a little on the cusp of humanism, but the Reform movement just this year named their school of sacred music, as they call it, after Debbie Friedman, Aliyah Shalom. So we remember her too, every time we sing.
May we know peace as we go on our way. May we be guided by love. May we be blessed with health and joy. May this be our blessing. Shalom. 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 May this be our blessing. Shalom. 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 May this be our blessing. Shalom. May we be sheltered by the wings of peace. May we abide in safety and in love. May grace and compassion find their way to everyone. May this be our blessing. Shalom. 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 May this be our blessing. Shalom. 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 May this be our blessing. Shalom.
Thank you, Joseph, as always, for the beautiful music. Thank you to David Weeks, who streams our service to the world, to Arthur, who runs our video, to all of you. Join us for our next Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.